Okay, so we are diving into some pretty interesting territory today.
Open relationships. We've got a whole stack of articles here.
We do.
And, this is something that I think a lot of people are curious about,
Absolutely.
but maybe don't always have the full picture.
Yeah.
And it's definitely more complicated than, just a quick
Right.
movie montage.
Exactly. And, one of the things that I found so interesting in this stack is that it's not just one thing, right?
Yeah.
Open relationships aren't just, oh, I have multiple partners. There's actually, a spectrum.
Right.
There's swinging, there's polyamory, and everything in between.
And you know what I find really fascinating is the reason why people are drawn to this in the first place. Like the articles talk a lot about freedom, deeper connection,
Of course.
more spice in life.
Right.
And like on the surface, who wouldn't want all of those things?
It sounds pretty good, right?
Right.
But then
Right.
reality hits.
Yeah, and these articles definitely don't sugarcoat it.
No, they don't.
They really dig into the challenges that people might not expect.
Right, because it's messy.
Oh, yeah.
You're dealing with human emotions.
Yeah.
And sometimes those romantic ideals clash with the realities of,
Totally.
being in a relationship, whether it's open or not.
Exactly. One of the things that I thought was really interesting is how many of these articles talked about communication,
Oh, essential.
which, we hear that in every relationship.
Right. Communication is key.
But it seems like it's even more vital in open relationships.
Absolutely. Because you're navigating so many different dynamics.
Right. And with multiple people, potentially.
Exactly.
And one of the articles brought up this idea of like, even when you think you're communicating well,
Yes.
things can still go sideways.
Oh, absolutely. Misunderstandings happen.
Yes.
And they can happen really quickly.
And sometimes like over the smallest things.
Right. It's those little tiny cracks that can turn into,
Oh, yeah.
full-blown earthquakes.
If you're not careful.
If you're not careful, exactly.
Yeah. And I think that's where like setting boundaries
Yes.
and expressing your needs really comes into play.
Absolutely. And doing that early on
Yeah.
is essential.
And one of the articles actually mentioned this tool called the Wheel of Consent.
Oh, yes.
Have you heard of this?
I have. It's a great tool for any relationship,
Yeah.
but especially in open relationships, because it really emphasizes that clear, enthusiastic agreement.
And not just like a blanket yes at the beginning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's an ongoing conversation
Yeah.
about what feels good, what doesn't, and how those boundaries might change.
Because they might change over time.
Exactly.
And you need to be able to adapt to that.
And communicate that to
Yeah.
your partner or partners.
Yeah. And I think, even with all the communication in the world, we're still human.
Right.
And we still have emotions.
We do.
And one of the big ones that came up in almost every single article
Yeah.
was jealousy.
Of course it's a big one.
Because how could it not be?
Right.
Right? You're navigating these new relationship landscapes.
It's exactly.
And even if you think you're totally cool with your partner being with someone else,
Yes.
there's still that potential for jealousy to pop up.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember that jealousy is a natural human emotion.
Right. It doesn't mean
It's not a bad thing.
you're a bad person.
It's just a feeling.
Right. And what matters is how you deal with it.
Exactly.
And I like how some of these articles talked about how to actually unpack those feelings.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's not even really about the other person.
Right. It could be rooted in your own insecurities,
Yes.
past experiences.
Yeah. Or even unmet needs within your existing relationships.
Exactly.
So it's really about figuring out, okay, what's at the root of this?
Exactly.
And how can I address that rather than just trying to suppress the jealousy?
Because that never works.
Right. Exactly. And then, on top of all of that,
Yeah.
we also live in a society
We do.
that isn't always the most accepting
Right.
or understanding of open relationships.
Exactly. And that's a whole other layer.
Right, because you can be doing all the work.
You can have the
You
communication,
can have the emotional maturity.
but then you step outside your door
Boo.
and you're hit with judgment.
Right. Or awkward conversations.
Family dinners.
Oh, yeah, the family dinners. And
Right.
it's like, how do you even begin to navigate that?
And one article I read dove into the legal aspects too,
Oh, wow.
which are fascinating because the law often lags behind social change.
Oh, absolutely.
So things like inheritance, parental rights, when you're in a multi-partner relationship, things get really murky
It's true.
and there's not always a clear answer.
Which I think brings us to the million-dollar question.
Okay.
Can open relationships actually last?
Right, because we're so bombarded with this
Yeah.
idea of fairy tale monogamy.
Right. Like, is there such a thing as fairy tale polyamory?
Exactly. And the articles present a range of perspectives on this.
As they should.
As they should, because there's no one-size-fits-all answer.
Right.
But some couples really emphasize this idea of evolving together, allowing space for individual growth within the relationship, and that's how they make it work.
And others talk about the importance of constantly adapting and renegotiating.
Because needs change over time.
They do.
People change.
Life happens.
Exactly.
So it's almost like you constantly have to be willing to...
Right. To check in and say, are we still on the same page?
Yeah.
Is this still working for both of us?
And I think that's good advice for any relationship, whether it's open or not.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, it sounds like ultimately...
Yep.
The success of any relationship, open or not, really comes down to a few key things.
Like honesty.
Honesty's a big one.
Self-awareness.
Absolutely.
And the willingness to actually put in the work.
The work never stops.
It doesn't.
No matter what kind of relationship you're in.
Right. You can't just coast on autopilot.
Nope. You got to be an active participant.
Exactly. And I think that's such a good point.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to get caught up in the idea of open relationships.
Right, or what it might look like.
Yeah, the fantasy.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, it's still a relationship. It's still work.
And it's still about two or more people trying to build something together.
Right, and so as you're going through these articles,
yes,
I think it's really important to ask yourself,
what's that?
Okay, what are my non-negotiables in a relationship?
That's a good one.
What are my deepest needs and desires?
Because those are the things that are going to guide you.
Exactly. And only you can answer those questions.
Absolutely.
So, we've talked about the good, the bad, the potentially ugly.
We've covered a lot of ground.
Are open relationships all sunshine and rainbows?
What do you think?
Probably not.
Probably not.
But can they work?
I think so.
I think so, too.
It takes more than just an open mind, though.
What else does it take?
It takes an open heart.
Yeah.
It takes open communication.
It takes that willingness to be open to the challenges.
And the bumps in the road, because there will be bumps.
There will always be bumps. That's just part of life.
That's part of relationships.
And so I think as you continue to dive into these articles, really just sit with everything we've discussed.
Let it percolate.
Yeah, and figure out what resonates most with you.
What speaks to you.
Because at the end of the day, that's all that really matters.
That's what it's all about.
Right.
Finding what works for you.
And creating a relationship that feels good and authentic for everyone involved.
Absolutely.
So yeah, keep those questions in mind.
I will.
Have happy reading.
Happy reading.